You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. National Nurses United's RN Response Network is sending the second delegation of volunteer nurses to Texas and some as well to Florida to assist in treating hurricane victims. The Nurses Union's Bonnie Castillo says these nurses will be there in a long-term commitment as residents recover from these monster storms.
We don't do the search and rescue, but what we do is provide the assistance in terms of the hands-on care in whatever capacity we can, the shelters, and then also we know that it's not going to be cleaned up in a week or 2 weeks or a few weeks. What's happened here is going to require a commitment, and we are making that commitment to go beyond what typically happens in the initial phase.
One Wisconsin Now says that the $3 billion state tax subsidy Republicans want to give to Foxconn is the largest ever state subsidy to a foreign corporation. Wisconsin's Legislative Fiscal Bureau says even if the rosiest of projections come true, it will take Wisconsin 25 years just to break even on the deal subsidizing Foxconn's startup in Wisconsin. One Wisconsin Now says the $3 billion from taxpayers includes no guarantee that Foxconn will live up to its promises to create and sustain thousands of jobs. The deal has no protections for worker rights to organize unions at the company owned by billionaire Terry Gao. The Foxconn chair once referred to the company's workers as animals. One Wisconsin Now says there's also no environmental protection in this deal. Foxconn is exempted from state environmental regulations, despite the toxic chemicals and huge water use required for the company to make electronic display screens. As Boston College grad workers complete their voting in their union election, second-year PhD student Michael Bailey says that he's excited to be a part of this battle to get a union.
I myself come from a working-class family. I've worked in a factory the summers when I was doing undergrad, so I'm just very familiar with the labor movement, and the state that it is in America today is disheartening. So being a part, even if it's at a university and not a traditional site of union battles, nevertheless, it feels right to me, and I want to be a part of this struggle.
Despite having an endowment of $2 billion, Boston College took away some of the benefits grad workers had, triggering the union organizing effort. United Teachers of Los Angeles rallied with parents and community members Tuesday in support of the DACA program. The union is donating $60,000 to groups financially helping Dreamers renew their protection status, which costs $495 per person. The union says thousands of Los Angeles students, teachers, and alumni face a tight October 5th deadline to renew their status. UTLA President Alex Caputo Pearl says Trump's actions rescinding DACA are a direct attack on our immigrant students and families, and he says they are antithetical to our values as public school educators. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you?
Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Here we go again. That's right, the GOP has another silver bullet magic fix, another repeal and replace. And look, did you think it was going to go away? Did you really think they were going to pack up and go home and say, I know, we lost? Do you think that was really going to happen? Well, today a group of Republicans are releasing their latest scheme. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. And look, when you've got a senator from Louisiana and a senator from South Carolina saying, we've got the answer, probably run quickly. They claim that this system, this latest bite at the apple, is going to give states the flexibility to create the system that they want. Not a one-size-fits-all, but the flexibility of states like Louisiana and South Carolina just to not cover people. So, that works, I guess, for them, right? Not so much. What they plan on doing is taking money away from the states and saying, see, now you have flexibility. You have the flexibility not to cover people. And according to analysis, this latest scheme, next year, 15 million people will lose their health care. And over the next decade, another 30 million people will be without health care. So, we'll be right back where we were before we started this whole debacle. Only now what will have wonderfully have happened for employers and insurers is that you and we have gotten used to paying higher premiums and having higher deductibles and using less health care. So mission accomplished. And look, they give you, it's under the guise of, we'll give you the flexibility. You could do whatever you want. And I had this thought that, I theoretically, we all have the flexibility to, fly to the moon. We all have the flexibility to, buy a boat or a large yacht or a large mansion, live in a castle. We be a prince or princess and wear a crown, prance around on pink fluffy unicorns. Theoretically, we can do all of those things. If you draw it up on a piece of paper, theoretically speaking. But again, we know what this is. And look, this is not an original scheme. Graham Cassidy at all is not, or Cassidy Graham, however you want to put it, not at all original. In fact, looks remarkably similar to all of the other failed Republican repeal attempts. Now, here's the thing that gets me. You have the Donald who's all for it. You got a lot of Senate Republicans going, yes, because, look, they don't really care. I mean, all of these Republican plans look identical. There's a little nibbling around the fringes, a little tweak here or there. But when you have a horrible system, when you start off with the premise of, we're just going to have a natural rate of about, a sixth to a fifth of the population not having health insurance. And you know what? They're just going to die sooner, and the hell with them. When you start off with that premise, when you start off with if you can't afford it, you don't deserve it, and if you can't afford it, you can't pay, then you die. If that's your premise, if that's where you start, then none of this other stuff matters. None of the verbiage, none of this is a new one, this is a new plan, none of it matters. Now understand this, again, they're saying is a long shot from passing, but again, all of these long shots seem to be coming awful close to passing. Because it's not about policy. It's really not. It's not about what's best for the American people. It's not what's best for workers. It's not what's best for a system. It's not even about public policy. That's not even a thought. And again, we now live in an era of it's just politics. Pure and simple. It's about me winning and you losing. That's what it's, there used to be a time, and it wasn't all that long ago, where we as voters wanted outcomes. We wanted good public policy. We wanted statesmen to hammer out policy that we're going to move the ball a little bit forward, just a little. Now it's just, I've chosen my team, and my team has to win, regardless of how it affects me. And that's really bizarre to me, because I've actually met people who are getting their insurance through the ACA and actually are, say, well, it's not bad. It's better than I thought it was going to be. But we're still advocating for the repeal. Because they believe that on the other side, there's this magical free market fairy who's going to go, I have something better. Here's a little dust. Now look, this scenario of I win, you lose, trust me, we all lose. It's that simple. And, I find it ironic that today, the Republicans decide that today is going to be the day that they drop this latest abomination. Because today's the day that Bernie Sanders is going to drop the single-payer legislation. Now, I've been saying for a very long time, Medicare for all is rational. It is the next step at good policy, at good outcomes. Because polling-wise, people really like Medicare. In fact, I know a lot of people going, I just need to make it another 2 or 3 years so I can get the Medicare. And I said back in 2008, one of the smartest things we could have done was open up Medicare to people 55 and older and let them buy in at a subsidized premium to get them out of the workforce to create more jobs for the younger generation to come in. Because the biggest cost in people retiring is not, hey, can I pay my mortgage? Or, hey, can I put food on the table? But, hey, can I buy my medicine? Hey, can I get health insurance? Hey, I'm 55 years old. If I drop of a heart attack tomorrow, I'm probably going to lose the house, going to lose everything else because I'm going to lose the job and the health insurance. Seems sane, rational. But again, we're evidently not living in a sane and rational time. And the understatement of the century came from Senator Sanders, who said the opposition to his plan will be extraordinary. Again, the understatement, because think of all of the entrenched interests in our healthcare system. Outside of the obvious, which would be the insurers who are just making money hand over fist. You look at the one, United Healthcare, I think it was. They had their CEO over a 4-year period, took $1 billion. Again, you go back to, that's $1 billion that didn't go to care. That's $1 billion that didn't get to get vaccines for children, didn't get to get checkups for people throughout the year. It's $1 billion in cancer drugs that weren't purchased. And you stop and you think about this stuff. Again, they're the first entrenched interest. Then you go down the laundry list of the private hospital people, the private care people who are making money hand over fist. The drug companies, the medical device companies, all of these people. But you hear from the right, well, Rick, if they don't have massive profits, enormous, obscene profits, they're not going to do it. And I go, okay, on paper, that might be actually true. But I look to other countries, and, I don't live in this little tiny bubble with blinders on. There are other countries that do this and do it fairly well and do it for a whole heck of a lot less money than we do it. And they don't have this pay or die mentality. I know people who live in Canada who Tommy Douglas Day is a thing because he's the one who brought the idea of, hey, let's have health care for everyone. Now, understand, Sanders' bill, it's dead on arrival. In fact, I don't even know that it's on arrival. But to me, this is a huge watershed moment. Because you got 15 senators, including 4 who are considered presidential candidates for 2020, who have signed on to this. This is a big deal. Because this is now taking what was a fringe idea just a couple of years ago, and is now mainstream to where we're having a serious conversation. And the serious conversation is now against because the Republicans have done a great job of saying, our ideas are better, the free market. And most people are looking around going, man, I'm getting screwed by the free market. My insurance premiums have gone up every year, year after year after year after year. And the Republicans have done a great job of saying it's Obama's fault. It's Obamacare, which is ridiculous. Because understand, those premiums were going up anyway. Because guess what? We're getting older. We're getting more expensive. And, of course, the profit margins have to keep going up, have to keep meeting those quarterly profit margins because the investor class needs their dividends. How else would they get a 6th or 7th vacation home? How else are they going to get the 3rd or 4th yacht? Come on. We've got to chip in less health care for you, more for them. But for me, this is huge. Now, there's a whole bunch of the naysayers going, well, we don't know what Sanders' bill is. That's why we drop the legislation. We debate what's in the legislation. Is this a Medicare for all, as it's called? scenario, or is this a Medicare buy-in? Is this a Medicaid buy-in? What is it? I think it's in the name, Medicare for all. We provide a tax structure that pays for the costs, probably through employers. Because, look, I've been saying for years, I don't think employers want to provide benefits anyway. I don't think they really want to deal with that headache. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is responded to by the right. Now, of course, we do know that the right wing is just going to go, see, tax, tax, tax. Understand how much think about this for a minute. How much you're paying for health care now through your employment. Because even if you're not paying out of your pocket for it, your wages are lower because of it. And as employers continue to pass those costs along onto their employees, it becomes a scenario to where now you got to really start thinking about which is a better deal. Is it a better deal that we get Medicare for all and pay a little bit higher tax rate? Or we continue down the path where we know this is going, where employers eventually just chuck the whole system anyway, and you end up paying the full cost of what the insurance is. Because look, I talked to a truck driver the other day. He's telling me $15 grand a year. It's $1,300 a month to cover him and his family. That's $15,000 a year. That is obscene. And he doesn't even have any. He's like, we have no medical problems. We didn't even go to a doctor last year at all. That's nuts. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit more on the, Trump and Russia and Comey and Flynn, the saga. The saga continues. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system. And the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. That was the day that the state police stormed Attica Correctional Facility in New York. 4 days earlier, the inmates had taken over the prison. One guard was killed. The guards were members of AFSCME Council 82. The prisoners demanded improvements to their brutal living conditions in the overcrowded prison. Police retook most of the prison, but the inmates held guards hostage in cell block D. One of the prisoners, Elliot James Barkley, explained the takeover. "We are men, we are not beasts, and we do not depend to be beaten or driven as such. The entire prison populace, that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disrespect for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States." When the police stormed the prison, they dropped tear gas from helicopters. They fired 3,000 rounds, firing on prisoners and hostages indiscriminately. They killed 29 inmates and 10 hostages. Police claimed the prisoners had killed the hostages. They also accused the inmates of committing atrocities against the guards. Public outrage swelled against the inmates, including racially charged hate directed at the black prisoners. But autopsies proved that all of those killed had been felled by police bullets. Attica became the rallying cry for those concerned about prison conditions. It has been referenced by many in movies and songs, including John Lennon's Attica State. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. The Rick Smith Show.
So it looks like the Donald's still not thrilled on all of the Mueller investigation. Still ranting and raving like a lunatic behind doors, it's being reported. And look, as the Mueller investigation continues down the road, more and more of what we know is going to come out. What we've been saying for a very long time is that, look, Trump and the Russians have had a long-term relationship. There's a lot of business dealings, and the more Mueller digs into that and the further down the road, the more we find out. Even Hillary Clinton got that in her book. Come on. Also, you've got House Democratic leaders who have written a letter to Special Counsel Robert Mueller saying, hey, you've got former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who evidently failed to disclose a 2015 trip to the Middle East to broker a business deal between the Saudis and the Russians to build nuclear power plants. Kind of just forgot that, that $200 billion deal that he was in the middle of. Just kind of forgot it. Wasn't something that was on the top of his mind. Oh, the fun. Anyway, here to talk about what's going on around the world, our good friend David Yankovich. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So what do you think? Trump ranting and raving like a lunatic around the White House.
Well, that's nothing new.
No story here. Move along.
The story is Trump-Russia. That's the story one. Everything else is behind that. But knowing that they've colluded with the Russians, the data stuff that they're starting to pull out now, the stories, this is why I don't believe the aliens have come and visited us, because there's no secrets that can be kept that long. And it's coming out. It's unraveling on them. This weekend we saw Donald Trump with, basically signaling to the Justice Department to put Comey, press charges against them. They're getting worried. They know that this is coming, and, they're gearing up for it. That's why everybody in the White House is wired up.
Well, but according to the Donald, he's a leaker. Everyone knows Comey's a leaker. Come on, David.
No, everybody knows that Obama trapped Trump Tower, except for, the fact that there's zero evidence, and everybody basically said Trump's full of crap.
Good point.
That's what we're looking
again,
at.
With this being 9/11, I can't tell you how many emails I got from people going, well, 9/11 was an inside job. George Bush did it. And I'm going, like you just said, a secret that big, this government, come on.
Yeah, it's like the moon. If we had not landed on the moon, first off, Russia would have called us out on it. But then there was probably 40,000 people who were involved in the space program. Someone would have said something by now to the point where it would have been hoaxed. It's the same with, just about everything else.
But let me ask you this, because this touches on on the conspiracy theory agenda that's all around us. That in years past, we just looked at these conspiracy nuts as just that. They're kooks. They're nuts. Go take your tinfoil hat and march somewhere else. Here's a roll. But now it seems that from what we're hearing, coming out of different Senate hearings and the stuff with Russia, that the conspiracy theory nuts, they now have this huge megaphone called the internet and Russian money and all of this trolling going on that takes these conspiracy theories and just amplifies them to the umpteenth power.
Well, it seems to me that they're using disinformation as a weapon. They're using the conspiracy theories as a tool to get their agenda passed. So, if you look at, when Trump said that, Hillary's going to hack the election and that he doesn't have faith in the voting machine. And, that right before the election happened, all of us who were sane rolled our eyes and were like, yeah, whatever, And then now we're looking back at that. Everything that he says is a conspiracy. Usually they're committing. They're killing truth and using disinformation to confuse people. But, if we really look at everything that Donald Trump has actually said, he's kind of done it himself when he blames other people for it.
No, you look at it, and again, as my grandmother always said, when you're pointing your finger at somebody, you got three pointing back at you. It's another one of those things.
Yeah, it's like, whoever spelled it, doubt it, man.
Well, at the end of this, what's really frustrating is it seems to be working. That, I thought we were a smarter society. Honestly, I did.
Well, I think there's something to be said about, like in the Men in Black movie, a person is smart. People are dumb, panicking. It. That was Tommy Lee Jones in the movie. The thing is, a person is smart, but when you get into groupthink, when you get into 100 people in a room talking and just constantly going over data and numbers and everything, you start to get into that group thought where you're not thinking individually anymore. You're thinking as a group, and a lot of times that can be dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this and the latest revelations that all along Facebook was saying no, nothing. We didn't do anything. No. Now they're saying, well, it's about $100,000 in Russian troll money we took. Yeah, that's just a small amount.
Yeah, and I was curious about what Mark Zuckerberg was doing, because he was starting to make very inspiring speeches and talking about this stuff like everybody should be included and everything else. But then we're starting to see Facebook was, I mean, to me that's treason. I mean, it's traitorous to some degree that you're taking money from a foreign nation to influence an election. I don't know if there's an exact definition of if it would be treason or hatch act or what, but I mean, that is not okay. It's not right. And the fact that they didn't disclose that, and now we're getting to that now, that's bad pool, man. That just doesn't look good at all.
No, I absolutely agree with you. But here again, we've got a president who keeps amplifying to his supporters as they're dwindling even still, that nothing to see, move along. None of this stuff happened. We won fair and square. And I don't think we really get to the bottom of what really happened until Trump goes.
Yeah, I'm going to make a Game of Thrones reference here, but I kind of feel like Donald Trump is the Mad King at this point. He knows that everybody's against him. He knows that the walls are getting closer. They're closing in on him. And he's just like, burn everything down. Divide the country, hurt as much as I can. Fight my way out of this thing. And I mean, it just seems that it's going to get worse. It's going to bigger and bolder wise, more divisive. We have hate groups that are marching now. We have worse than we've ever seen in this country throughout all of our time. Like, it seems like it's all kind of come together, and we're kind of going through almost a civil war type moment right now. And I hate saying that, but I mean, they're advocating it out there that shoot liberals and that kind of stuff. And you have the marches, the hate groups, and the violence is happening, and all this because we have a president who's severely divisive, and really he doesn't care who he hurts. He only wants to keep himself in the office.
That again, you lay out a really scary premise, but here again, I've had people tell me that the 2016 election and what Russia did is on the scale of a 9/11 attack, and yet all of us look at 9/11 and we're just we know exactly where we were at the moment all of that happened, yet we don't as a country seem to think that what the Russians did is on that scale yet. Do you think we ever come around to just how important this moment is?
Well, I mean, I have to agree in a sense, because every president that I've ever heard speak, they always talk about the number one priority of being president is the presidential office itself. You have to keep that intact. The sanctity of that office is the most important job that you have. Obama said it, George W. Bush said it, everybody except basically, Nixon and Trump. So, I mean, I think I have to kind of agree with that. I mean, if this comes out like wholeheartedly, we have all the evidence that this election was hacked, that the president's corrupt, that the Republican Party backed him up and corrupt, supported it and covered that up. I mean, we have no more faith in government at that point. We won't have faith in the voting mechanism or the democracy itself. So we have to really dig deep here and, I mean, get to the bottom of it, but think logically and try to move forward in a way that isn't so destructive. Because, I mean, right now, I mean, if everything comes out the way that it looks, I don't know that people are going to have faith to vote anymore at all. I mean, what's the point? You're just going to get stolen anyway. Or, in the presidency itself, you have an office that is basically revered, and we can't trust the people that are there. Our leaders are the very people who are supposed to protect us and help this country. I mean, there's always been like that lingering doubt. Politicians aren't honorable. They're not trustworthy. But it's a whole different thing when it's like they're willing to sell us out to another nation. And I mean, it's a bleak moment right now. But I see a lot of people out there who I really believe in who are stepping up, and I think that we're going to be able to come back from this, though. I really do. But
no, I agree with that as well. Look, I mean, the country has been in peril before. I mean, we have been in moments throughout history where we've had trying times. I mean, you look at the Civil War; we were literally ripped apart. I see this as almost that kind of a moment, though, that as a country we are that divided in our political thinking and in this team sport mentality. And from a disinformation campaign's perspective, wow, I don't think the Russians could have planned a better scenario if they tried.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of that was skill and how much of it was luck, because I know that they've been doing this for a long time. Right now I'm actually in Philadelphia, and I went to Independence Hall yesterday, and I was thinking about kind of what we're going through and what they went through. You're in a revolutionary time period. You're breaking off your government, and everything else. We've definitely been here before. We've had hard times, civil wars where the Confederates were 100 miles away from the Capitol. We've been in bleak moments. 9/11. We'll definitely come back. It's just a matter of everybody coming together and being good to each other. It's really easy to begin hating everybody who was part of this or people who don't agree with you politically, and we really have to kind of dig deep and find the love, not the divisive hatred. Because I know as cheesy as it sounds, hate only gives you more hate. Nobody wins.
And we see that every day coming out of the Republican side of the aisle, and I hate to be that kind of divisive. I want to see there be some leadership over there. I want to see some bipartisanship, because I look at Trump with the debt ceiling deal. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this. He reached across the aisle to Democrats and said, hey, this is dumb. We've got to get this done. And Republicans lost their freaking minds. Where, something that most of us think is sane and rational, because I don't even think we should have a debt ceiling. You want to talk about a debt ceiling? Talk about it when you're spending the money, not when you actually have to pay the bill. I would love to have a debt ceiling to say to my credit card people, go, you know what, I can't pay you now. I've gone beyond my debt ceiling. It's just nuts.
I don't politically. This is very difficult because you have a president who, by all means, should not be there, and is advocating hate and doing horrible things in office, and then we cut a deal with him. I'm all about keeping the government open and everything else, but is this kind of like one of those things where it's like you give one little thing and then you have to give 50 more? And it's become like a power play on his part because he was able to reach across the aisle. I want to do what's right for the country, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, is it right for the country to tell him to figure it out on his own like they told Obama for 8 years? I don't know, the right answer to that right away. I would probably, if I was in Congress, do what I could to keep the lights on for now. I don't like that the Democrats did cut a deal with him just because of what he is, trying to accomplish with everything else, with his wall, with immigration, with the Dreamers, with everything. I almost wish that they would have done to him and played hardball with him like they did with Obama over.
Yeah, but Democrats are never going to do that, David. We both know that.
I think the new wave of Democrats that are coming in 2018, I think we'll see them do that. I got to tell you, I'm so surprised. I listen to them talk, and they're throwing fire out there. And, and they're not afraid to go against the party if they think the party's wrong. They're not afraid to go against the leadership if they think that's wrong. They're throwing fire. They want to get things done. They don't care about politics like career politicians do. They want to be in this for the right reasons. At least the people that that I'm around and talk to.
Interesting. Again, 2018 is going to be a big year. My concern is that we're still going to be relitigating 2016 and end up in a circular firing squad.
I hope not. I think the way that Randy Bryce is doing it is the way that, like, the blueprint for all the Democrats, which is, he's bringing in everybody. He doesn't care if you're Republican, you're Democrat. He doesn't care if you're, Bernie supporter, Hillary supporter. He's going for it all, and I think that's what it is. And when someone asks him about it, he says it straight up. Yeah, I voted for Bernie, but I'm in this for everything. Like, this is too important. And I think that people are smart enough to get behind somebody who is willing to reach for everything. And I think that that's what we all want. Instead of having it be a Bernie Hillary debate, it can be, this is all of us. We all want the same thing. Let's go for it.
Yeah. But again, I come back to, today the Sanders is dropping the Medicare for All bill that he's come forth. And again, I see this as one of those moments where this could be relitigating 2016 because you had a lot of the Hillary supporters who aren't on board with the single payer idea, and this could be one of those. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out because I am a single payer guy. It'll be interesting to see how this plays.
Well, what they got to do is, I mean, the politicians who are actually running for office right now have to run on a platform everybody's in. You know, like we're doing this for everything, and have their own message, be their own people. And when someone tries to bring up the 2016 primaries, which they will, you know, you just say, I'm in this to win for 2018. If we keep looking back to the past, we'll never win anything again. And, I mean, that's the truth. Bernie and Hillary, they're still duking it out. I mean, Hillary's book came out, Bernie's doing his stuff, everything else. I mean, we have to move past this moment. Because right now we have a president who is probably the most corrupt that's ever sat in that office. Republicans are in power in every city, state, local, municipal, everything. It's time. Like, you know, get it together, pull your pants up, and let's get to work here.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And put aside that 2016 election. We got to find out what happened. We've got to move forward on that. But, you know, stop the bickering. And my, you know, again, you know, someone emailed me last night and said, you know, I find it curious that Hillary's gone on this book tour now, you know, while you've got the hurricanes, while you've got all of this suffering and stuff going on. And it pointed out that, you know, John Kerry, when he lost, didn't go on a book tour after Katrina. And there's some valid criticism there.
There always is. You know, I mean, there always is valid criticism to be had on any politician when you're in public life. Hillary's not running again. This book proves it. Like, I can't imagine the things that she's saying in this book. I can't imagine that she's planning on making another run. This is like her final bookend, the chapter of the life of being a politician in a career. I think she's still going to be involved in politics. I still think she's going to be a public figure, but I think the days of will she or won't she are done. I could be completely wrong. I have no inside information or anything like that, but it just seems to me that, you know, she put it all out there in this book, and she went all in, and now she's just, you know, ready for her private life where she is still involved, which she'll never have a full, private life because of how popular she is.
No, of course not. Last
you
question.
know, go ahead.
Last question I got for you. You know, on 9/11, you had Trump give the speech there. Were you surprised that he blew through right through the 2 moments of silence?
No, I mean, I don't think he has the ability to be silent. He doesn't understand the reverence of memorials or feelings of desperation or hopelessness. I mean, you know, I've seen before that he said he lost several friends, you know, on September 11th, but they fact-checked him and he didn't lose any. He donated money to charities and he didn't. I don't think that he has a reverence for how that felt. I think he's a egomaniac who it's always about him. You know, he talks to Boy Scouts and he makes it about him. Everything is about him. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really surprise me that on 9/11, on that day and in that moment, you know, he blew right through the moment of silence and just kept going.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where I was waiting for the right wing to lose its mind, because had Obama done that in any of the previous 8 years, there would be holy hell to pay.
John Obama wore jeans on Air Force One and they lost their mind.
They were mommy jeans, though.
Yeah, the hypocrisy of what we see from the right. You know, every day it gets to me and it burns me up inside. But that's all it is. It's hypocrisy. So I mean, they've never now lost the high ground to be hypocrites about anything. Like that. That's one good thing that's come out of this moment. Is like anytime in the future they want to use a moral compass or they want to use some kind of high ground, whatever. Right back to like, shut up. Go sit down.
Yeah, go sit in the corner. I remember healthcare.
Yeah.
You remember you tried to take healthcare from 30 million people? Oh, remember the 90 people who voted against funding the recovery efforts in Texas? Remember that? Yeah, I will always remember that.
I'll never forget it, and I'll always remind them. I mean, it's just, you know, it's what they do. I mean, Obama had his feet on the desk. They lost their mind about that. There's a million of these. You know, when I look back at this 20 years from now, I'm still going to be reminded. I'm like, nope, you can't go there. Just shut up.
Yeah, we've got lots of work to do, David. I appreciate the time, man. Keep up the faith, keep up the fight, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Always. Thanks for having me, and talk to you later.
Good stuff, David Yankovic. You want to check out his website? We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people.
rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2013. Riot police used tear gas and water cannons to clear out Zocalo Square in Mexico City. The square was occupied by protesting teachers. The teachers had been on strike for weeks. They wanted changes made to educational reforms that had been passed by the Mexican government. The education reforms included new performance-related testing for teachers, but the reforms did little to address the economic disparity faced by many school children. The evaluation tests did not take into account the difficult conditions for teachers in the poorest regions of Mexico. The teachers worried the tests would lead to mass layoffs. Police wanted to clear Zocalo Square before Mexico's annual independence celebration. Most protesters left peacefully. However, some remained. Police, using armored vehicles and helicopters, clashed with the remaining protesters. Officers tore down protesters' temporary shelters and put out small bonfires. Protesters responded by throwing projectiles at the police. The police arrested many of the remaining protesting teachers. After the square was cleared, a BBC reporter noted that police had achieved their goal. Still, the reporter added, the sight of riot police and armored vehicles in the country's most emblematic plaza is not the image of unity the government wanted to portray hours before President Peña Nieto celebrated his first Independence Day as Mexico's president. If it sounds familiar, it is, because teachers in the United States are dealing with similar issues. Teachers, through their unions in both the United States and Mexico, fight for a quality education for all children.
We don't need no education.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
One of the lucky things about being rich is that you automatically become handsome. Your jokes are hilarious, and politicians treat you with fawning deference. On the other hand, the unlucky thing about being poor is that, well, you're poor, and society generally treats you poorly. Indeed, morally corrupt right-wing officials in Washington and across the country are pushing the idea that poor people must be punished, as if debilitating poverty is not punishment enough. One especially ugly example of this is spreading through hundreds of school districts, an abhorrent practice called lunch shaming. From first grade through senior class, most schools make families pay for their kids' cafeteria lunch, and a computer program alerts cashiers when a student's lunch account is unpaid, a shortfall that nearly always involves poverty-level kids. Rather than dealing with this discreetly, school systems have taken to publicly humiliating children whom the computer tags as having a meal debt. Some schools literally take an indebted student's tray of food away, making a show of dumping the lunch in the trash in front of everyone. Some remove the hot food from the child's tray, replacing it with a cold sandwich of white bread and a slice of cheese, claiming that this so-called sandwich meets federal nutrition standards. Others actually brand the offenders, using markers to write, "I need lunch money," on the poor kids' arms. Nearly half of America's school districts use some form of shaming and stigmatizing, embarrassing children to tears. This is Jim Hightower saying, what educational lesson is this teaching? And what's the matter with school boards and lawmakers who are either allowing or directly causing this abuse, using lunch to punish the poor? Being poor means you lack money. Being mean to the poor means you lack a soul.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So Steve Mnuchin again on Tuesday saying that the top earners in the country, they're not going to see tax breaks. No. We're going to lower the rates, and we're going to close loopholes. We're going to lower the rates, and we're going to close loopholes. Come on, we're going to lower the rates and close loopholes so that rich people are going to pay more in taxes. Now, look, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I just didn't, wake up. I was born at night. It just wasn't last night. All of those cute little phrases. Because we've seen this movie. We've seen this before. Come on. I mean, this was the tax reform bill of '86 all over again. We're cutting the rates, but we're closing the loopholes so that, the rich people will pay their taxes. So they won't spend all of the money on avoidance. Right? So all of those lawyers that are, tax lawyers who are figuring out how, GE actually gets paid from the federal government to exist, they're going to all be out of jobs because now it'll be cheaper. And you go, wait a second, we've seen this and we've seen how it goes. And again, we're going to continue to move down that same path to where we know we've seen the movie. We've seen the rerun. We've seen the sequel. We've seen sequel 2. And now we're revisiting this again. Understand what's going to happen. If they get their way, they will lower the tax rate again. They will close loopholes temporarily. The lobbying arm of the 1% will then go back to work and get all of their loopholes back with a lower tax rate. And look, I'm not somebody who's against loopholes. I think you go back to the good Eisenhower tax code, a good socialist president. You have a high enough tax rate to afford all kinds of loopholes while still bringing in enough revenue to fund education, to pay for the military, to build roads and bridges, to invest in tomorrow. This bad idea top to bottom. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News. Ellen, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So Mnuchin's saying, you know what, we're only going to be cutting taxes on working people, Ellen.
Well, what can I say? I mean, these guys are totally amazing. What can I mean, I have nothing to say except that they keep on surprising me at every moment.
What's surprising to me is they think we're stupid and that we don't remember that this is what got us into a $20 trillion debt mess. This exact idea. We're going to give more to the very wealthy. We're going to create the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. And then that's not even enough.
Well, the point is that they are doing all kinds of deals. And right now they're trying to negotiate with the Democrats on several issues, but they're peeling off Democrats who are running for re-election in very red states, right. Areas that Trump had won. And so that's who they're trying to get close to. Right. For instance, last night there was a dinner at the White House on tax reform, and they invited 3 Democrats, but the 3 Democrats are running for re-election in red states.
And look, Manchin and Heitkamp and the guy from Indiana, Donnelly, they're all in trouble.
Well, of course they're all in trouble, but just in case they win, the Donald wants to take care of them.
Yeah, you're right. My fear is that they then flip and we end up with the repeal
and replace. Well,
I
don't think they're going to flip to be Republicans, but they are, Democrats in name only.
No, I get that, but we end up with, because today we find out that, Lindsey Graham and Cassidy from Louisiana are going to lay out another repeal plan.
There's 4 of them, and they're laying out the appeal plan at 11:30, just in about 50 minutes. And they are going to be talking about doing some kind of block grant to the state.
Yeah.
And then at 2 o'clock today, Bernie Sanders is going to be outlining his Medicare for All.
Which I think is a great thing, and I think it's something that should have been done a while ago.
Right, exactly.
We start pushing that conversation because, look, I think the American people are looking at what the Republicans are offering. And look, this Cassidy Graham bill, this is just a rehash of all of the bad ideas we've seen for the last several months. And I've been waiting for Democrats to go, here's our vision for the future. It doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of passing, but it's our vision. It's where we want to go. And it gives people the ability to go, hey, I've got 2 ideas here. Which one is feasible?
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's really quite unbelievable what we see happening. And obviously Trump has decided, well, he can't get all the Republicans, so he's going to peel off a few Democrats who are in trouble and try and make friends with them. By the way, today he's meeting with the only African-American Republican senator, and they're going to be meeting, he's from South Carolina, they're going to be meeting at the White House today. There's a lot of talk about what they think they're going to say, but of course we're not flies on that wall, so we don't really know.
Yeah, and I can only imagine. But here's the thing that scares me, because you've laid out that he's talking to Democrats. He's talking with the only African American senator and the Republican senator. It seems like someone is advising him to be less divisive than the Bannon term was, which I got to be honest scares me a lot more than having that hard right, my way or the highway kind of guy.
Well, for sure, because if he becomes good at what he does, that is President Trump, that means that he might be able to get his way on a lot of legislation, and that is scary.
Yeah, I mean, because nothing I've seen yet come out of the Republicans has surprised me. It's the agenda that I thought would be coming, especially on the healthcare front and on the tax front. But if he can figure out how to pit Democrats against one another, 2018 looks scary to me.
Well, I still think that 2018 might not get back the House or the Senate, but I don't think it's going to be the disaster that people think it's going to be.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what are the folks in Lilydale telling you about?
Well, that's just why I'm saying what I'm saying.
I mean, because there's
what I think, and I have said this a number of times, that I said Trump was going to win, but I think at this point he's not going to make it much past the midterms, mainly either because of health problems or he's going to tweet out something that they invoke the 25th Amendment, which is a mental health problem.
He hasn't. Wait a minute. He hasn't done that already? Have you been following his Twitter feed?
I have been following his Twitter feed, and yes, in my view, he has been tweeting out crazy things, but not necessarily in Pence's view, and it's Pence that's going to have to make this call.
Oh, okay. So when Pence sees an opportunity, you think that's when the trigger will be pulled?
Well, I think Pence is claiming he doesn't want to be president. I think that's the biggest false claim I've ever read.
What's that? Ye death protest too much?
Exactly.
Oh man, I got to tell you, if it weren't for the really deadly consequences, this would all be very, very comical.
Well, for sure. The other thing that really does worry me, though, is the Dreamer legislation. Now, of course, we haven't seen any of this legislation, and Trump backed off the point that he was going to insist that there be some immigration reforms and wall or whatever built. But the fact is, I was actually in the Senate chamber the day the Democrats controlled the Senate, and it went down, and the Dreamer Act went down, and these were Democrats. So right. I think that we have to look at some of what the Democrats might be doing as well.
What are we anticipating?
Well, I don't know because we haven't seen the legislation, and we don't know. I mean, supposedly Nancy Pelosi is working with Paul Ryan on it, but we'll see what happens. I mean, this kind of stuff can go up in flames in a New York minute. I will tell you something very interesting. As you know, I'm very friendly with Haley Barbour, the former Republican governor of Mississippi, because I worked so hard to develop a community center, et cetera, in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. And it's interesting, Governor Barbour had an event for Cholene and myself and this other woman we worked at the governor's mansion. And he mentions in his books, two gay women go to the reddest of red states. So he's very good on this. He got an award on Thursday night from the Mississippi Geographic Society. And what's fascinating about that is he said two interesting things. One, that he's very pro-immigration, that immigration has made the country strong. He didn't say anything directly about Trump, but clearly that's where he was going. And also, even though he's been criticized because apparently he made some remark or something, he did get $20 million for a museum about segregation and what happened in Mississippi. and he got it from the state. It's the only state-funded museum. It's supposed to open in December.
Wow. One of the things that I learned when we were, back in 2015, we had done a civil rights tour and went throughout most of the South, is how much money has been spent on civil rights tourism. I mean, like everywhere where you saw a horrible moment in history now has a museum popped up.
Right, but most of those museums are done for private, and there hasn't been a state museum. Mississippi is the first state to devote actual state money to developing this museum. Now, you're right, it may be tourism, so maybe it's not such a good thing to do. Maybe it was done for financial reasons. But in any case, it was done in Mississippi.
Yeah, well, let me ask you the cynical question then. I mean, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, and maybe you have an opinion. The cynic in me goes, maybe it's an attempt to just rewrite history, because we've been seeing an awful lot of the rewriting of what actually happened throughout our history.
Well, yes, except for in Mississippi, there's also, you can tour Jeff Davis's home on the Mississippi Gulf with all this, Confederate stuff. So I'm not so sure in Mississippi. Again, you have to deal with one little area at a time. And so I'm not so sure that it's an attempt to rewrite history.
Yeah, we went to the Southern White House, as they called it, there in Birmingham. And the woman who was giving the tour, wow, you want to talk about a rewriting of history. Boy, she gave just the most glowing review of the Confederacy and of the South, and how the North was horrible. It was quite enlightening and eye-opening.
Wow. Well, I haven't heard that, but there's always a first time.
You should go there. It's a wonderful little tour.
It's in Alabama, you said?
In Mississippi, Birmingham.
Birmingham.
Or, I mean, Birmingham, Alabama, yes.
Birmingham's Alabama, yeah. There's no Birmingham,
Sorry, my mistake.
So, right.
My mind was thinking Mississippi. I was in Alabama. But to me, I got to be honest, there's parts of me that go, it's the same thing.
Well, I will also say this, that Haley Barbour supported the stars and bars remaining on the flag, the Confederate flag being part of the Mississippi flag. He got, before the storm, before Hurricane Katrina, he got 10% of the African-American vote on the coast. After the storm, he got 70% of the African-American vote on the coast because he had done so much and was colorblind. So, it depends.
Yeah, well, as I've always said, it's not really about black or white, it's about green. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland.
You could write a book with that.
Learned very young. It wasn't about the color of our skin. It was about the fact that we were all broke.
Right.
Pretty simple stuff. Ellen, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News. No, I mean, look at it. We did that tour throughout the South, and the idea of civil rights tourism, became front and center. And you saw all of these places where in the history books, you remember, there were dogs biting people and fire cannons and, people being beaten at lunch counters and all this stuff. Now they got these big, beautiful museums. The best one that I thought was just by far the best was across from the 16th Street Baptist Church, where the explosion happened. The curator there, Ahmed, was just fantastic, and it was in Birmingham, and it's right across from the square where the dogs were, in the cannons and all of that stuff, and they actually had the door of the prison cell that Martin Luther King was locked up in Birmingham. And it was one of those things that he said, look, this is the most prized possession we have, and we encourage people to touch it and to feel those bars. And I thought it was one of those really interesting, things. And you also saw Bull Connor's tank was there. They had tanks in the police department back then as well. Now, I wonder what a Bull Connor-like figure would think about today, where police departments have rocket launchers. Just kind of a thought. But the idea of the tourism just. Pretty amazing. And I also thought the Rosa Parks museum was quite fascinating as well. But all good stuff. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, a little bit about what's going on in Pennsylvania. The budget, evidently, we're no longer going to be calling the impact fee an impact fee on the gas. I guess we're going to just change the name to something else. Stick around. We'll talk about what.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. National Nurses United's RN Response Network is sending the second delegation of volunteer nurses to Texas and some as well to Florida to assist in treating hurricane victims. The Nurses Union's Bonnie Castillo says these nurses will be there in a long-term commitment as residents recover from these monster storms.
We don't do the search and rescue, but what we do is provide the assistance in terms of the hands-on care in whatever capacity we can, the shelters, and then also we know that it's not going to be cleaned up in a week or 2 weeks or a few weeks. What's happened here is going to require a commitment. And we are making that commitment to go beyond what typically happens in the initial phase.
One Wisconsin Now says that the $3 billion state tax subsidy Republicans want to give to Foxconn is the largest ever state subsidy to a foreign corporation. Wisconsin's Legislative Fiscal Bureau says even if the rosiest of projections come true, it will take Wisconsin 25 years just to break even on the deal subsidizing Foxconn's startup in Wisconsin. One Wisconsin Now says the $3 billion from taxpayers includes no guarantee that Foxconn will live up to its promises to create and sustain thousands of jobs. The deal has no protections for worker rights to organize unions at the company owned by billionaire Terry Gao. The Foxconn chair once referred to the company's workers as animals. One Wisconsin Now says there's also no environmental protection in this deal. Foxconn is exempted from state environmental regulations, despite the toxic chemicals and huge water use required for the company to make electronic display screens. As Boston College grad workers complete their voting in their union election, second-year PhD student Michael Bailey says that he's excited to be a part of this battle to get a union.
I myself come from a working-class family. I've worked in a factory the summers when I was doing undergrad, so I'm just very familiar with the labor movement, and the state that it is in America today is disheartening. So being a part, even if it's at a university and not a traditional site of union battles, nevertheless, it feels right to me, and I want to be a part of this struggle.
Despite having an endowment of $2 billion, Boston College took away some of the benefits grad workers had, triggering the union organizing effort. United Teachers of Los Angeles rallied with parents and community members Tuesday in support of the DACA program. The union is donating $60,000 to groups financially helping Dreamers renew their protection status, which costs $495 per person. The union says thousands of Los Angeles students, teachers, and alumni face a tight October 5th deadline to renew their status. UTLA President Alex Caputo Pearl says Trump's actions rescinding DACA are a direct attack on our immigrant students and families, and he says they are antithetical to our values as public school educators. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
For a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Day is new, and everyone is waiting on you.
So, screaming headline on Tuesday. Screaming headline: Pennsylvania passes severance tax. Evidently, on Monday, the Republicans in the state house they voted along party lines in the committee to pass through a severance tax. Except it wasn't really a severance tax. It was just to change the name of the impact fee to a severance tax. And they were calling it a rechristening. A rechristening. We're just having a rechristening. It's going to be wonderful. It's not going to bring in any more money. I mean, it's not going to solve our budget problems, but it'll get rid of that pesky problem of saying Pennsylvania doesn't have a severance tax. How I guess, one, how nuts do they think they are, and how dumb do they think we are? Wow. Anyway, here to talk about that, and let's bang around a couple of other things. Our good friend, Dr. Stephen Herzenberg, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy to be here, Rick.
So we've got a severance tax.
Yeah, no, if it doesn't walk like a duck and it doesn't talk like a duck, it's not a duck. Yeah, it's not a severance tax. So
darn it.
So that
close.
Means therefore we don't get the $500 million on the way to $1 billion a year we would get from a real severance tax. So if if their action equaled their words, then actually we'd be a long way towards solving the state's extended budget deficit in a real way. But of course, since their deeds don't match their distortions, then we're still in the same hole we've been in terms of the budget deficit and burning the furniture to heat the house, and taking money that's meant for infrastructure or meant for the environment, and pretending like you don't have to worry about having an infrastructure next year or having an environment next year. So it's crazy. And,
it is crazy. But here's the thing. I mean, again, you look at all the gimmicks, and we've been talking about this for a while. All the smoke and mirrors, all the gimmickry, all of this stuff. This just another one of those things that at some point, don't you have to look to the leadership and go, there's something wrong with you to allow something like this to go through? Because it didn't do anything other than make me question their ability to govern.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't. There were some rumors floating around today that, and no one seems to know what's really being discussed, that they might actually increase the impact fee as well as lying about what it is. Because again, this is pretty weedy stuff, but we have a fee, an impact fee on shale drilling that's a per well amount.
Right.
But a severance tax, by definition, and what exists in all the other states with a lot of gas, is you take a portion of the value of the gas that's pumped, and like West Virginia gets 5% of that amount of money. And the problem, of course, with our impact fee is that even as prices recover, even as production continues to grow very rapidly, so the value of the gas pumped is the price times the amount produced. And if both of those are going up, which they are now, suddenly you're looking at a large pile of money and a bonanza for the gas companies, and it's lunacy to not get a portion of that money to fund Pennsylvania's budget.
Right, and I think most people, Steve, think it's like a sales tax. The more they pull out of the ground,
it is.
The more they pay. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly how it works. Is the total value of sales, and we get it's about 5% of that. Our sales tax is 6%, and Philly and Pittsburgh, they actually pay another percent on top of that. So a 5% sales tax in effect on gas production, and again, small enough that it makes really no difference to the amount of investment and amount of job creation associated with that industry. Small enough also because it's, again, every other state with a lot of gas already has something like this. So we're not at any kind of competitive disadvantage, even though that's a somewhat exaggerated argument. So they're stuck on a couple things. They're stuck on still thinking that shrinking the size of government is the most important problem, which it's not. People want middle class jobs. They want education funded. They want the cost of college to not be going through the roof, so that people don't graduate with enormous amounts of debt that hang over them for decades as adults, right? But they're still, their right-wing ideology says the problem is taxes and the size of government, and which hasn't actually increased in Pennsylvania in 30, 40 years. And they're just wrong, and so they're not addressing the inequality that really matters to people. They're not investing in the things that will give people better jobs in the future, like education, or raise living standards in the state, like infrastructure investments. It's just they're off base. So they're again, Mark Steer, as you know, likes to talk about Pennsylvania's investment deficit. That's the real deficit we have, because we're shortchanging the future everywhere we can. And this budget is that they're trying to get through the House, where we raid every pile of money set aside to do something special, worthwhile, like protect the environment, like invest in like multimodal infrastructure. I mean, a lot of your audience knows there are truck drivers out there. There's a revolution in logistics that's taking place in this country, and Pennsylvania's in the middle of it because we're we're between lots of places that want goods and lots of places that produce goods, and it's idiocy to, when that's part of your economic advantage, you're crazy to have a second-rate infrastructure. And multimodal, again, it's a big part of where it's at in terms of going from trains to trucks. And you could give this speech much better than I could, Rick. But
but here's the thing. I mean, the fact that our infrastructure is so pathetic. For those who fear the future of automated trucks and automated cars, the fact that our infrastructure is so bad, and you ask any truck driver, one of the worst in the country. We're not going to be anywhere near that technology because, as I talk to people who are in this field, they say, you've got to have good infrastructure with lines on the roads and the ability for the automated vehicle to know where it's at and follow a proper path. We don't have that. Yeah. So, I mean, to the extent that shippers can do it, we're setting things up so that they'll go around Pennsylvania, not through Pennsylvania, whenever they have a choice, which is crazy. But that's the way it is. You brought that up, and I understand there was a to-do on Monday and Tuesday talking about just that, the automated trucking and all of this stuff. Tell me what happened. So I wasn't there, but obviously we worked with some of the folks who were there, and one of the key things, the whole conference was about. I mean, there is this national kind of excitement, certainly among tech firms and logistics firms, about automated vehicles. It may not really be driverless trucks. You need there's lots of transitional stages, and lots of people are saying you're going to have the driver still to be part of loading and unloading and service and stuff like that. So one thing that happened is it's like 300 plus people, a lot of engineers, a lot of policy people, and turns out that there's been a state process for sort of convening stakeholders and thinking about this that's going back a year or two now. And guess who's the only group that hasn't been part of that process? Labor. There you go. Labor. And because look, I mean, you can't be at the table when you're on the menu, Steve. Fair enough. It's just, so that's disappointing in the extreme, which is, again, there's all this elite anxiety about, what about the poor truck drivers? But then you forget to include them in the discussion about the regulations and the process and the phase-in, which means no one's sitting there saying that, well, however we do this, in social democratic countries, in European countries, when you have stuff like this, you think about how do you make the people hurt by the technological transition, how do you make them whole, but how do you make sure that they can retrain for another job? But the bigger issue, actually, because I think to me, and again, Frank Snyder, the Secretary of Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, got a chance to speak on one of the panels, so he underscored to people that working people and their unions should be at the table in this discussion. So hopefully that'll be remedied at least to some extent going forward. But I think the other point that Frank drove home is that again, there's this discussion that's kind of it's an elite discussion, and it really is divorced from the reality of truck driving, which again you and a lot of your audience know about, which is people are wringing their hands about 10, 20, 30 years from now, what's going to happen to the poor truck drivers that are going to lose their jobs? Well, maybe they're not going to lose. Well, maybe they're going to lose them. Maybe they're not going to lose them because, again, partly because we don't have the infrastructure, as you talked about, to take advantage of the technology. But the other reason about that they might not lose them quite so quickly is because truck drivers make so little money now that it's not as cost effective to use these advanced technologies, because truck drivers in effect are making $10 an hour if you're lucky in some cases, right? Including so-called independent contractors. And so the other point Frank made is that if you really have concerns about truck drivers, well before you get to the issue of lots of people losing their jobs, you need a reality check. You need to understand that
long-haul truck drivers make about half what they made per hour now that they made in the 1970s. That's 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You're taking a real middle-class job back when we had regulation, back when the Teamsters were strong, and you have turned that into a low-wage job where people have to work unsafe and unhealthy numbers of hours, 50, 60, 70, to make a decent living.
Wow, you're off there. Try 70.
All right.
And then try 80, and then try running two logbooks that get you to 90.
But the people in this room and in this discussion, and the people, again, who are sort of wringing their hands about the hypothetical loss of truck drivers when the trucks drive themselves, it's like, wait a minute. Can we do a primal scream here and say, how about doing something this year, this decade, for the truck drivers who've been screwed for 40 years?
Yep.
How about that, right? And again, there are things you can do. So this is one of my favorite recent rants, because I want this to be on the agenda of Governor Wolf's middle-class task force. It's like, again, there are, across the country, independent contractors. So people who really work for one customer, but the company doesn't want to pay unemployment, doesn't want to pay workers' comp, doesn't want to be subject to the minimum wage, right? All the reasons that companies decide they don't want to call people who are really employees. And finally, there are a bunch of cases that have made their way through the courts and that are making way through the courts to sort of somewhat trim companies' sails around that stuff. Like a lot of these are in California, for example. And so, again, Pennsylvania ought to be, hey, we've got the third most truck drivers. I mean, even though we've only got the sixth most people at this point, we got the third most truck drivers. And that goes back to the point that we're between lots of people who want stuff and lots of people who make stuff. And so let's be on the cutting edge of let's pass a state law that strengthens labor and industry's hand in terms of enforcing laws against people being misclassified as independent contractors. Let's give truckers low-interest loans so that rather being, stuck on a lease to not own deal with a company that's charging them an unfair interest rate, given how low interest rates really are, let's help them actually own that truck if they actually are an owner-operator or a genuine independent contractor.
Wow, those are ideas that I haven't heard. Because look, because the stories the horror stories that you hear out there of people who've been stuck in these lease-op contracts and these people who have just been screwed over by these companies. And you're right, as deregulation crushed labor in the LTL market, especially where I'm familiar, wages have not just stagnated, they've gone down. In fact, I tell the story all the time, Steve. I made more money back in the mid-'80s than they're making now doing the exact job, and not with any of your economic gimmickry or inflation models or whatever. Dollar for dollar, I made more over 30 years ago.
Well, that's it. And that's exactly one of the stories Frank told, because the last job he had before he became a full-time union guy in the steel industry was actually driving a truck. And he said he made more then, which was probably in the 80s, than people make today. So, again, there are other things. I mean, right now, one of the things that lots of states do, but including Pennsylvania, is there's public money that goes to these commercial driver's license mills, right? So that, again, because the job sucks so bad, lots of people who are licensed to drive a truck end up not doing it that long, and they get out. Good for them. But then you need more people. You need to continually replenish the pipeline. So they got public money doing that and setting these people up in some cases, not simply to go into a job that sucks, but setting them up to become a misclassified independent contractor and to have one of these, debt peonage kind of deals, leasing a truck which they can never quite get ahead of because they're they're charged such a rate that they make so little money after their expenses that they can't pay down what they ostensibly still owe on the truck. So there again, the bottom line, this was Frank's second point. First point, could we have working people if and truck drivers be part of the conversation about automated vehicles? But second point, and more immediate point, hey, if you want to worry about truck drivers, you got to worry about them here and now.
Exactly.
They are being screwed, and there are things we can do. And so again, our We're not shy about saying this, but when we said this in the State of Working Pennsylvania, we said it in a couple of paragraphs in last year's State of Working Pennsylvania. It's like, step one, get your head around what's happened to truck drivers in Pennsylvania. That's not that hard. Step two, and you do that two ways. And this conversation points to that. You do it partly by looking at the numbers, but you also got to talk to truck drivers. So I hope that we can get some truck drivers speaking at the listening sessions that the administration is going to have for its middle class task force. Or you could have some separate sessions where you're inviting in truck drivers. I mean, that part of what people want to do is they want at least they'd like to be acknowledged that they're being chewed up in a meat grinder. I mean,
but the first part of that, though, Steve, is that they'd have to admit it to themselves that they're being chewed up by the meat grinder.
Well, yeah, all right. No, that's fair. And again, maybe that's part of the challenge. I mean, you and I both know that there are places where this has been admitted that in Los Angeles, right? There's a porch campaign that the Teamsters have going, working with a lot of allies, including environmentalists. 12,000 truck drivers take stuff to and take stuff from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And, a decade ago, a lot of those people would be saying, I want to be an independent contractor, and don't tell me I'm misclassified. And, buying into the myth of independence that's part of how people get led down that garden path. And those folks have come to realize that they're being independent contractors with these unfavorable terms where a big chunk of their money per hour ends up, going right back to the company that's, supposedly paying them. That's all of that is part of a system that's rigging the economy against regular people.
Yep.
In this case, against truck drivers. So again, people have figured that out. They've actually, some workers there, 500 I think is the number I saw, have become unionized. Actually, some small companies that have actually done quite well found out that they can pay decently and pay workers' comp and not misclassify people and pay health care, and they can actually still compete because, again, in the end, there's downsides to working people ridiculous hours and having them hang on to an old truck that breaks down and pollutes the air, and so again, I've not done enough. You have done enough because you've worked in this industry and you know lots of people who still work in this industry, but I don't know where things are in terms of truck drivers in Pennsylvania and how they think of their own situation. But so that's why part of it has to be, let's do the numbers, let's figure out what the quote facts are in terms of how screwed these folks have been in Pennsylvania for a long time. But let's also listen to these folks and then you see where it goes. But the bottom line is there's whatever path you take, the bottom line is that if you really have a middle-class task force, then you really, one of the pieces of work, maybe it's 2% of our jobs. I don't know what the right number is, but one of the pieces of work is paying attention to these folks and listening to these folks and figuring out how you can make their lives more humane in the next 10 and 20 years. Again, from my point of view, we could reunionize truck driving in the next 20 years. Then actually you got a situation where labor's really at the table when it comes to the something hitting the fan, with the automated vehicles and the driverless vehicles. And from a position of strength, then you could be talking about, well, let's use some of the productivity gains to bring that average hours down from 80 to 70 to 60 to 50. How about the 40-hour week?
How about that? Boy,
how about that?
A lot of truck drivers would love that. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys come up with. My only criticism is you call it the middle class forum. A lot of these truck drivers, not in the quote unquote middle class. I did want to ask you one last question. Tomorrow, your big awards event. What's going on?
So every year we have an annual awards reception, which is there's lots of great hors d'oeuvres, so you can basically get dinner and you walk around, and then we honor some great folks. It's just a really nice evening, and we're doing one thing we're doing a little different this year is we're honoring a whole bunch of the grassroots groups that are part of the resistance movement. So the indivisible groups. So we got like 14 of those from different parts of the states that are going to have a little dialogue with them during our reception part, and then we'll give each of those groups some recognition because, again, we've figured out that just producing the facts and the information is not how, unfortunately, you change the policy and the politics.
Right.
So, we're thrilled to have those folks in and get to know those folks better, and then we got a bunch of great honorees, and we got a terrific keynote. Bishop Dwayne Royster, who's the political director of one of the faith-based organizing networks in the country, PICO, People Improving Communities Through Organizing. He's going to be speaking. He's a guy who talks a lot about the moral economy, which is something that we also talk about from a slightly different but overlapping perspective. I mean, he and we both want, how about an economy that sort of supports our values rather than undermines them? And how about an economy that also works, for regular people, but also works? And so, again, it's two different kind of perspectives on the same basic direction that you'll get from him compared to from us. But so we're looking forward to that, and we're honoring also the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, and Neil Bisno of the Service Employees, and Steve Hicks of APSCUF, and then Joan Duval Flynn of the NAACP, who's
good
a wonderful
stuff.
board members are. So it's really, it's good people. So again, people should go online, www.keystoneresearch.org. There's the rotating window that if you're a little bit patient, you'll get a chance to link to where you can still buy a ticket. We don't turn people away, as Rick knows. So it'll be a lot of fun, and I hope people.
Good stuff. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com and how people can sign up, and hopefully folks will go.
Terrific. Thanks.
Good stuff.
And
Steve?
We'll talk to you offline, Rick, about a couple different things.
Appreciate it. Good stuff. Dr. Stephen Herzenberg, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center. The event, good times. Seriously. Take a look at it. A quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
A boy with a gun. I got a picture in my pocket of the lucky one. I'll announce the winner on the radio. With my microphone, I do a super show. I wear a cowboy hat. It is my business hat. I'm on till 1 a.m. I must tell you that I'm a man with a mission.
The Rick Smith Show. Changing America for the better.
One of the lucky things about being rich is that you automatically become handsome. Your jokes are hilarious, and politicians treat you with fawning deference. On the other hand, the unlucky thing about being poor is that, well, you're poor, and society generally treats you poorly. Indeed, morally corrupt right-wing officials in Washington and across the country are pushing the idea that poor people must be punished, as if debilitating poverty is not punishment enough. One especially ugly example of this is spreading through hundreds of school districts, an abhorrent practice called lunch shaming. From first grade through senior class, most schools make families pay for their kids' cafeteria lunch, and a computer program alerts cashiers when a student's lunch account is unpaid, a shortfall that nearly always involves poverty-level kids. Rather than dealing with this discreetly, school systems have taken to publicly humiliating children whom the computer tags as having a meal debt. Some schools literally take an indebted student's tray of food away, making a show of dumping the lunch in the trash in front of everyone. Some remove the hot food from the child's tray, replacing it with a cold sandwich of white bread and a slice of cheese, claiming that this so-called sandwich meets federal nutrition standards. Others actually brand the offenders, using markers to write, "I need lunch money," on the poor kids' arms. Nearly half of America's school districts use some form of shaming and stigmatizing, embarrassing children to tears. This is Jim Hightower saying, what educational lesson is this teaching? And what's the matter with school boards and lawmakers who are either allowing or directly causing this abuse, using lunch to punish the poor? Being poor means you lack money. Being mean to the poor means you lack a soul.
To get more of Jim Hightower's populist take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to, visit www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Just a day job, it's something got to do. It's kinda hard when everyone looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good, like anybody would. I'm just your average, ordinary,
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. The website, ricksmithshow.com. So yesterday we talked a little bit about Melvin Reddick, the Harrisburg area resident, Central High grad, IUP graduate, Trump supporter, anti-Hillary bot, that evidently we're now saying is the beginning of the artificial folks that were being created to throw the 2016 election. And look, I look at this stuff and go, it's what we were talking about last year with all of the trolls going on and all of these fake accounts and all of the, I get so many Twitter bots and so many Twitter fake accounts that throw nonsense. It's not surprising to me. But our good friend Will Bunch wrote a fantastic article titled Meet the Philly Central High grad who was really a Russian troll helping Trump to win. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, anytime. Thanks for having me on again.
So Melvin Reddick, Central High grad.
our friend Melvin, yes.
Are you surprised by this?
I'm a little surprised they whenever they pick one of your institutions, the fact that they picked Philly Central High. I mean, think about it though. Remember, the Russians were savvy enough to know what the key states were in the 2016 election, right? Yep. So not only were they creating these Facebook trolls, but they were creating them in swing states like Pennsylvania. Here's a guy they said, I guess they pulled out their handy-dandy map just like you or I might, map, a province in Russia, right? And try and figure out what the big cities are or whatever, and how they found Central High School. Good for them. But, one of the big unresolved questions here, right, is where were these Russians getting their information on what states to target, what cities to target, what types of voters to target? As Robert Mueller and other investigators look at this question of collusion, I think this Facebook piece is a big piece of it, and I think they really need to get onto where these Russians were getting their information about what messages to send out and who to send them to. And, for example, did this company, and I don't know if you and your listeners have talked about this much, but this Cambridge Analytica, which was this big data firm that was created by a hedge fund billionaire named Robert Mercer, who over last summer became a big supporter of Donald Trump, employed Steve Bannon, employed Kellyanne Conway for a time in his organization. Was he working with the campaign? And don't forget, the person in the Trump campaign who was overseeing the data operation was Jared Kushner, right? So, was Jared Kushner again involved in somehow getting the information one way or another to these Russian troll farms in St. Petersburg, where people sat around creating these fake identities and trying to influence our election, and it really looks like they did influence our election.
Now, is the thought that the Trump campaign was involved in this? Because Trump's saying no, wasn't? Or was it, the Russians could have just been listening to American talk radio? Because, when I was looking at Melvin and all of the stories that came out in the New York Times about, it just seemed to me that there was a lot of stuff there. Like the fact that you would pick a guy in central Pennsylvania to be a troll who came from Philadelphia. You've got that kind of ability to do some dog whistle about the division between central Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. It just seemed like there was a lot of research that went into this guy.
Right, and he went to college in Western Pennsylvania, right, at IUP. He had the whole state covered pretty much. Although it's kind of weird that they picked photos out of a guy from Brazil. That was kind of odd. But you can argue it both ways. Look, Russian intelligence allegedly is pretty good at the intelligence game, right? So, I'm sure they can do a lot of research to figure out, it wasn't rocket science, I guess, figuring out which the 5 or 6 key battleground states were in 2016. But, how did they why did they seem to be coordinating their messages with not just the Trump campaign, but also with Breitbart, which was published by Steve Bannon. I don't know if you guys talked about, I mentioned this in my column about it's now come out that the Russian troll farms were also actually setting up these Facebook events and like trying to create rallies or create events where people would protest, on these hot button social issues that were pro-Trump, in that they were, like, say, anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant. And the one that was described in this article in the Daily Beast yesterday was an event that they tried to set up in Twin Falls, Idaho, where people would go to the city council meeting to protest this alleged, pro-Muslim refugee policy that they supposedly had in Twin Falls, Idaho. But again, what was interesting was this was in response to a controversy that had gotten a huge amount of coverage on Breitbart News and some of these other right-wing websites. So again, is it coordination? Are Russian spies just reading Breitbart to figure out what's going on to help elect Trump? I think these are the things that Congress needs to investigate. I mean, the opinion part of my opinion column was my opinion that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook need to come clean on everything and anything they know about Russian influence that went through their company. They just after denying for months that there was any Russian effort that they knew about, they admitted this week that they accepted $100,000 last week, I guess it was $100,000 in ads from what turned out to be this Russian concern on issues like LGBT issues and other issues that again took a pro-Trump viewpoint. So clearly they knew about this because they're cashing the checks, right? So
and if they're admitting to $100,000, I got to imagine it's a lot more than that.
Right, and the way that Facebook works, even in a $100,000 ad buy, can be seen by as many as 70. I'm not saying it was seen by 70 million, but that's kind of the maximum reach of a $100,000 ad buy. Supposedly, is 70 million U.S. Facebook users. Which is significant. And
more importantly, Will, I mean, just to go back on that, it doesn't matter that if it was 70 million. This election was decided by far fewer than that. We're talking, several thousand.
By 70,000, right? In the three states that put him over the top, 70,000 vote margin. So yeah, this does matter. And the one thing I was going to say about the $100,000, first of all, we don't know if that's. It could be much more than that. And then, think about the in-kind contribution, if that's the proper term, of Russia paying these trolls to spend their entire day on Twitter and Facebook, putting these pro-Trump messages out there. The thing that we can't forget is one of our most clear-cut laws in this country is that foreign interests cannot donate to our presidential campaigns, and that means foreign citizens, foreign millionaires, whatever, and it certainly means foreign governments, right, or government-related entities cannot be making a campaign contribution. If these people are buying $100,000 in ads to promote Trump or Trump's issue stances, that's a campaign contribution. Right there you've got a major prima facie violation of U.S. election law. And like I said, the $100,000 is on top of the in-kind contribution of all this other trolling that they basically contributed for free to the Trump campaign. So right there, even if there was no coordination, and again, it kind of almost strains credibility that there wasn't coordination. But if there was no coordination, you still have a massive illegal campaign contribution from Russian interests to help get Donald Trump elected president, which is gigantic, scandalous. And if there was actual collusion by high-level players, then it's time to maybe start cranking up the impeachment machine if that's the case.
Yeah, or at least start locking up people like like Jared. Maybe he could share a cell with the other Jared.
Well, when you guys were talking about Melvin Reddick yesterday, I don't know if this came up or not, but to me it's fascinating that his Melvin Reddick's first posting on Facebook about the hacked documents that the Russians had obtained from the DNC was made on June 8th of 2016, and if you remember, June 9th was the meeting in Trump Tower that was attended by Jared and by Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and Russian people who all had all kinds of shadowy connections to Russian intelligence. And I mean, June was when so much of this seemed to gear up. You know, after Trump had pretty much nailed down the nomination. He wasn't formally nominated until the next month. But I mean, during that period, you see this flurry of activity. You see all these new troll accounts suddenly being created and showing up on Facebook, or these bots that showed up on Twitter to promote to denigrate Hillary and to promote Trump. You know, you had these meetings and communications going on between Trump campaign players and Russian players who seem to have been close to Vladimir Putin. Not long after that was, and you start seeing these, leaked emails. You know, first the DC leaks was the initial leak, and then you saw more material from the DNC, and it started going through WikiLeaks. And then also in the summer of 2016, you had the Trump campaign people trying to change the Republican Party platform, so it took a more pro-Russia stance on responding to the Ukraine situation. So, I mean, you just had all of these things going on. You know, Carter Page meeting with people and Jeff Sessions, all of these things going on in June and July of 2016, and they're asking us to believe that none of this was coordinated, and I think the truth is going to come out pretty soon, one way or the other. So,
and hopefully before the 2018 election, because look, at the end of this, what's concerning to me is, yes, I believe the Russians had a hand in this. I believe they did this. But the other part of it is would it matter to you if it weren't the Russians, if it were just, you know, the Republican Party who were spreading this kind of disinformation and pursuing this kind of, you know, basically just lying? Would it matter?
Right. It would matter, and we would. I would hope we'd be talking about that too, if that was the case. And you know, actually, I'm sure they were doing that to some extent.
No,
right?
I would argue this is what the whole. But I would argue this is what the whole State Policy Network and all of you know, their offshoots have been doing for years. They create their alternative reality, to use a term of theirs, and they come up with their alternative facts, and they have this echo chamber that they've built of, you know, convincing people of all these conspiracies and all of this anti-government stuff while feeding them, you know, this pro-free market stuff. It's you know, if the Russians didn't learn from our think tank system, I don't know where they got it from then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they just watched us to some degree, you know. But and I think just now, you know, in 2017, I think it's starting to sink in on people how important
critical thinking is.
Yeah, that for sure. But also just the role that, you know, media manipulation, you know, which, you know, really started with Fox News and with a very different brand of talk radio than the distinguished type that you engage in, but you know, some very disingenuous right-wing talk radio, and Fox kind of got the ball rolling on this, and you know, I mean, basically at some point since the turn of the millennium, you know, right-wing talk radio on Fox basically supplanted any kind of party leadership in the Republican Party in terms of setting the Republican agenda, you know, and you know, we saw that a lot in the 2000s and during the Tea Party moment, when anybody who dared oppose Rush Limbaugh, for example, you know, would get primaried and lose their jobs, you know. So, you know, so you had this fealty, but then you know, I think 2016 with fake, you know, I mean, we went from distorted news to just flat out fake news, and you know, the envelope keeps getting pushed further and further, and people have been getting away with it, and now, like I said, I think now there's some awareness of that the fake news was out there, that it's on Facebook, that it's on Twitter. So now the question for American society is what are we going to do about it? You know, I mean, obviously we don't want to go too far, swing the pendulum too far in terms of censorship, but how do we prevent this from distorting our elections?
That's a good question. But here's the thing, and I get this a lot. You've got the people who are saying, well, you know what? It's just a taste of our own medicine. We've been doing this stuff to other countries for generations, and this is just our own bad behavior through our CIA come home to roost. I'm curious your thought.
Well, two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, obviously, if you go back over the, especially during the heyday of the Cold War, if you want to go far enough back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, yeah, I mean, the U.S., in Italy or Greece or some of these other countries, was doling out cash to try and prevent communists from getting elected, right? I don't think we should be doing that, but at the end of the day, I'm an American citizen and I'm an American voter, and I want to have the right for my vote to count as much as possible in terms of electing the president, and that means I don't want foreign powers subverting this. So I think those two things can be judged independently. I think if the U.S. is unfairly meddling in other people's elections, that should be called out, and I would certainly do that. But that doesn't mean I'm just going to do a kind of a shrug and say, well, since we did it, it's okay that Russia elected this bozo, for want of a better term, president of the United States. I just don't think we can be complacent about that.
No, I'm with you. So let me ask you the other side of this. You as a media person, do you have a problem with foreign entities owning media outlets in the United States? And I look at RT, and Sputnik and some of the other ones that are being cited as big drivers in all of this. Should they be allowed to act as a corporation would owned by an American here?
That is such a tricky question, and I mean, there's been a flood of reports on this very subject just in the last day or two. In fact, just this morning, I saw the New York Times Magazine that's going to be coming out this Sunday has a huge article by their media columnist Jim Ruttenberg that they just posted online, looking at RT specifically, and I guess maybe Sputnik to some degree, and their influence, and. To the extent that these are journalistic enterprises, I get very queasy with the government trying to censor or meddle too much in real journalism. But then what needs to be determined is
what is real journalism?
Right. I do think we should be not naive, and I think we should take a look at to what extent these people are journalists and to what extent these people are agents of influence or propaganda, and it's a thin line. I mean, technically propaganda is not banned by the First Amendment. I mean, what's illegal is espionage, right? So, I mean, are these entities engaging in espionage? I mean, that's a pretty high bar to prove. So it's a really thorny question. I mean,
I was just curious your answer.
I pretty much almost never think that censorship is an answer to anything. I mean, I just usually believe in an unfettered free press. And in the case of Sputnik and RT, we may find that the answer shouldn't be censorship, but maybe should just be getting people better information. I mean, I feel like on any free speech issue, the issue isn't preventing free speech. The issue is making sure that smarter, more just, more sane speech is the speech that wins out. I mean, and this may be another case of that, which is hard because that's hard work, But censorship is a lot easier. But censorship is not what this country's about. So it's a tricky question.
Which is why I love your columns. I mean, you're always spot on and always optimistic. I love that about you.
I am, because otherwise, what's the point, right? You've got to say, all right, this looks really bad right now, but there's got to be something we can do. What can we do about it? And I always come at every issue from that perspective.
There you go. I hope folks will take a look at your article. Meet the Philly Central High grad who was really a Russian troll helping Trump to win, by Will Bunch. Will, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you.
Yeah, same here, Rick. Anytime. I really enjoy it. Thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
Thanks so much, Will Bunch. Again, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out the great article. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day Rhode Island Governor Theodore Green demanded that federal troops be sent to crush a textile strike in his state. The general textile strike, then in its second week, stretched across the Piedmont from New England to Georgia. Green declared, quote, "We are face to face not with a textile strike, but with a communist uprising." His demands came after days of pitched battles between thousands of strikers and the Rhode Island National Guard in Salesville and Woonsocket. Secretary of War George Dern assured the governor and the press that 3,000 combat troops were ready and available for immediate duty in Rhode Island. President Franklin Roosevelt declined to send in federal troops, but the state assembly authorized the governor to close the mills and appropriated $100,000 in funds to beef up state police forces. The governor then directed Rhode Island's police chiefs to round up all communists on charges of inciting riots in textile centers across the state. It gave local authorities the pretext to round up and arrest over 200 alleged agitators, strike leaders, militants, and radicals. Over the course of 4 days, 3 strikers had been killed, including Charles Gorsinski at Salesville and Jude Cordomenci at Woonsocket. Hundreds had been seriously injured in the 2 cities. 7 of the 16 strikers who had been shot by state troops were near death. State National Guardsmen had been given the shoot-to-kill order to protect the mills and the scabs. Once the governor shut down the mills, police forces easily arrested dozens of flying squadron picketers and established martial law-like conditions, though it was never officially established. Within days, the strike would be quelled in Rhode Island. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From San Francisco, California, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The UN Security Council met Monday afternoon to pass a new round of sanctions on North Korea. The United States drafted the sanctions and had hoped to fully cut off North Korea from international oil markets, effectively starving out the regime and perhaps crippling its economy. But in the end, Russia and China intervened and blocked that move. The sanctions that passed instead capped North Korean oil imports by a projected 30%, a number intended to make the regime make difficult decisions, keep the economy moving or keep the nuclear program running. While the U.S. was forced to compromise, Ambassador Nikki Haley projected confidence that the sanctions would have an impact.
We are done trying to prod the regime to do the right thing. We are now acting to stop it from having the ability to continue doing the wrong thing.
In addition to oil, the new sanctions also completely ban exports of North Korean textiles, a sector of that country's economy that has to date been excluded from international sanctions, and which earns the country about $250,000 each year.
When these new stronger sanctions are added to those passed last month, over 90% of North Korea's publicly reported exports are now fully banned.
Speaking on September 11th, Nikki Haley attempted to tie the threat of North Korea with the threat of terrorism, making the case that the United States and its allies have wised up to the threat posed by Kim Jong-un.
And we will never forget the lesson that those who have evil intentions must be confronted. That day, the United States saw that mass murder can come from a clear blue sky on a beautiful Tuesday morning. But today, the threat to the United States and the world is not coming out of the blue.
For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Randall sent me an email yesterday talking about the fairness doctrine. And look, those are days long, long gone. And the idea that you had to provide equal time on airspace, on television, for if you had one opinion, there had to be equal time for the other one. And what usually happened is you would have someone who really, really articulate making their point, and then an Archie Bunker-like character blabbering on for a couple of minutes about the other side and incoherently. But at least there was the attempt to balance the thoughts. And the news media attempted to be fact-based. The sad reality is it doesn't matter to me who it is, if it's the Russians or if it's, somebody just trolling or somebody just got to be first. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And this idea that, what we're seeing is so much inaccurate, wrong, and blatant lies in the media structure. I don't consider myself part of the media. This is an opinion program. This isn't news. I talk about news. I give my thoughts on news, but I'm not breaking news to anyone. And I'm very open and honest about that. This is my opinion. You can call and disagree. We can have a conversation on what is right, what is wrong, and have actual discussions, which is part of the what I think is lost in this country. Too much of what happens is we end up in this bizarre world of shouting past one another. Now, look, when Reagan ended the fairness doctrine, that was a shot at creating this situation. Clinton in 96 with the telecom bill, just allowed for mass consolidation. So we're in this world now where you have a handful of companies, a handful of interests controlling the mass of what we see, hear, and read. The fact that whoever it is, say it's a Russian troll farm, say it's a Republican or a Democrat for that matter, spending $100,000 and getting access to 70 million people with lies and misinformation is bad for democracy. Especially when you've got this mentality, everything I see on the internet's right. It must be true. It's on the internet. It keeps coming back to us. At some point, don't we have to be more judicious on what it is we consume? At some point, don't we have to be more thoughtful and more critical thinkers? It's one of the things I tell my kids. Information in this coming generation is cheap. Everyone's got one of these phones in their hand. They can look up anything. It's a matter of what sources you're using. It's a matter of what information you take, and then you take both sides and you put it through a filter system. I was going back through the 2016 election going, I cannot believe the things that people seem to believe about Hillary Clinton. And it's all because, 30 years of right-wing echo chamber just slamming. Look, I don't like the Clintons for a whole lot of policy reasons. They're political opportunists. They're all that stuff. But guess what? All politicians are. But the crimes and the things that they were accused of committing, you go, really? I'm struggling with it. And all of this conspiracy thought that, 30 years ago we would laugh at has gone mainstream thanks to Facebook, because it's so easy to share this stuff. I can't tell you how frustrated I get when my aunt sends me every idiotic chain email going, have you seen this? Yes, I've seen this, and it's wrong. It's ridiculous. And there's one organization out there trying to fight all of the misinformation when it comes to internet, memes, and that's Snopes. And they're about ready to go broke. The reality is we as a country had better figure out how to deal with this, because it's not going to stop. The Melvin Reddicks of the world are not going to disappear, especially since the Russians figured out just how successful they can be causing chaos in our system. They're laughing all the way back to the bank because they're profiting from this. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Does it matter if it were Russian trolls or if it were American trolls? Would it matter to you? We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.